All right, so it's the second day of April 2014, and this is going to be PPM49, and I'm definitely in one of the more unusual, but in some ways pertinent spaces. This is the auditorium of Irvine Auditorium at the University of Pennsylvania. This is the ceiling, and this is the space. Just to give you some perspective of where I am, and I really do hope that my computer and the wireless system here at University of Pennsylvania, as well as YouTube, all cooperate so that I can record this. And so let me get to where there's some light. There we go. That's pretty dramatic. Yeah, so I'm here for a conference my colleague Troy Richardson has organized. It's with his SIG on Indigenous Education, and so they're doing a pre-conference here on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania, here in the Irvine Auditorium, all day long, raising some really interesting questions. One of them being the sort of ontological question, right, of indigenous narratives. That is to say, indigenous narratives as offering up a whole history of, for me anyway, would be alternative ontologies. That is to say, alternative from the dominant discourse. So the idea, here I am into the 49th meditation, originally written 10 years ago. Oh, and what's fascinating is that one of my colleagues that I haven't seen in about 10 years, Vanessa Andreotti, she's here. So I haven't seen her in 10 years, and it's a small group, and to see her was interesting. But in the session, in fact, that she was part of, and there was this idea that came to me, which had to do with a sequel. The first time I can now think of a possible sequel to Being and Learning, which would be Being and Relearning. And I'm going to turn this so that I can capture the pipes from the pipe organ, and move over here. So, at any rate, this is where I am, and this is the conference, and this is a very famous hall. The lighting isn't so wonderful, at least here, and I'm going to take a while just to get the lighting right. Yeah, I think that'll work. And yeah, Margaret Thatcher apparently gave a presentation here, and Hillary Clinton. So. And now Eduardo Duarte. So I'm going to read this so that I take advantage of the time and the space when I'm here. Again, we're into the 4th chapter of Being and Learning. This is a close reading of Plato's Allegory of the Cave. Once again, here from Irvine Auditorium on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania on this 2nd day of April, 2014. The releasement as a solo flight of a singular prisoner liberated from the darkness of his subterranean abode culminates with a longing to return to his companions. At the moment of enlightenment, where he sees the world in its proper order, the vision of this sublime relationality recalls the memory of the most significant relations he has had in his life's experience, namely that of his companions. The moment of his long vision is a bag of mixed emotions. He recognizes the vision for what it is, an extraordinary revelation of beauty, the beauty of the world shining forth and capturing him. He has been released into the open region and again finds himself a captive. But now he is held captive by the sublime, the overwhelming beauty of the world's harmony. He is held in wonder by this harmony. His captivity has been renewed, and he stands in awe of this beauty that shines forth. But this moment of awe and wonder is interrupted by the memory of his fellow prisoners, those whom he has left behind, who still dwell in the darkness and remain bound at the neck and feet. Up to this point, the event of his releasement has been one of disorienting experience after another. One disorienting experience after another. He has been forced to stand upon weak and untested limbs, dragged up a steep passage, hauled out into the blinding light of a strange place. Throughout this event, he is hardly able to become settled before he is unsettled again. This is overwhelming for one who has never before moved, And it is not until he has arrived at the moment where he is contemplating the sun that he is able to take stock of where he has come and where he has been. It is at this moment that he recalls his past, his comrades in chains who remain below in their subterranean dwelling. It is at this moment where he has arrived at a calm repose, where he has been gathered into the harmony of the world's relations, that he remembers his friends. In the wake of this sublime revelation, he calls his friend to mind. An interesting way to describe memory, for it underlines the important way in which this memory is a recalling, a recollection, and a remembering, a bringing back together. Although he's been guided by a mysterious unnamed liberator, the ascent has been a solo journey. For even if he was guided and helped, he was alone in this process, undergoing this arduous process without a commiserate. The silent calling of his companions expresses a powerful yearning, a desire to turn again, to return back to his home. This desire has been repressed throughout the transformation, and as we are told in part 2, he had to be restrained from rushing back to his place with the others. There's no sense of his being restrained now after he has seen the light and heard the harmony. He is free to return to the cave. He is happy for his change, but sorry for his friends who have remained below. He returns to them bearing the news of his journey and with the hope that they too will want to join him. He returns seeking their companionship, their fellowship, so that they might together wander through and explore this world that exists above and beyond the cave. It is with this mix of joy and pity that he returns below to his companions, bearing the news of this world that he has been revealed to him. For certain, he is unprepared for the reception he receives upon his return. He's unprepared because he's failed to recognize the significance of his change. The arduous process of liberation has indeed been transformative, and he must recall each painful and disorienting moment, but the subtlety of this change is beyond his perception, and it exceeds him. The change has been dramatic, but itself remains part of that which exceeds his grasp, for it arrives from and remains part of this world's harmony that has been revealed to him. He has been drawn up and into this world and has been shown the harmony that relates all which exists there. He's been caught up in and made part of this relationality, this harmony, but is now no longer who he once was. He returns changed and transformed. His releasement into the open region has been a liberation, and he is properly a new person. But his memory remains close to him, specifically the memories of his friends. His releasement into the open region has been a liberation, and he is properly a new person, despite his not being totally cut off from his past. His chains may have been cut, but his memories remain close to him, specifically the memories of his friends, who remain close to his heart, so close that he can recall them to mind. And that's how it ends. So this to me is an interesting sort of, once again, kind of not coincidental. It seems like nothing is a coincidence in this work, but because of the work I've heard presented today at this conference here in Irvine Auditorium, University of Penn, at this conference that I've been attending today, that my colleague Troy Richardson from Cornell has organized. And so a lot of what I've been hearing is in terms of the question of global indigeneity and indigenous education is this struggle, right, between past, present, and future, and this complexity of place and the complexity of locating oneself in a place where one has always been, where one's ancestors are from, be it an island in one of the islands in Hawaii, or the Maori in New Zealand, or North and South American indigenous folks, disrupted, right, by colonialism and disrupted by settler logic. And so this reflection now that I'm making on this third part of Plato's Allegories, strangely relating. Of course, it's problematic because it's part of a narrative of enlightenment and liberation that happens after one has been taken away from one's home, right? So there's this already this logic of what will come with what we call modernity, which is to say that, you know, you're better off when you leave your place of dwelling and you go somewhere else. And this is part of my own writing. So it's troubling at one level, but at the same time, what I'm suggesting is the transformation, of course, is never complete and never total because of this memory. And so this is the tragic dimension of it. That is to say that this tale of emancipation, which really is, if we want to, as I'm reading Plato, is really an emancipation from the limitations that are placed on us by the social historical context. So there's a way to read the allegory as exactly this point of breaking away from the logics of, in the case of the folks I'm with today, the logics of modernity and the settler logic. It's precisely breaking out of coloniality and the struggle against coloniality. There's a way to read the allegory as a decolonial narrative. That is to say, to get, you know, outside of the cave and to break the bonds of colonialism. That might be a stretch, but this is the context of the place that I find myself in today, and so I have to relate to that in some way. But in terms of the context of being and learning, that what I'm suggesting then is that even with this movement and this break that happens with the encounter with beings presencing, because this is what I'm really accounting for at this point, is that this education that is emancipatory, that the prisoner is receiving, is one in which they have been now led to an effacement with this power of possibility, right? Beings presencing is shown to them. And this is, of course, a very different understanding of Plato's image of the sun, and I've already talked about that as, you know, that this isn't the static sun of a single form or idea, but it is rather, the sun is a dynamic power or force, and in this sense, being as presencing, right, the force of becoming, right? So it's being as becoming, right? So in this sense, then, the emancipation happens with this break, the break in the repetition of the same, the break from history, if you will. That's this transcendent moment, and the showing of a gap between past and future. Again, this is problematic and this is complicated because it does say something about one's relationship with the past. For a moment, it's suspended, right? And we're taken outside and beyond. So there is this vertical transcendence. This is one of the original tales of the vertical transcendence that people find so problematic sometimes because of the implications that we become extraterrestrial, if you will. But of course, there's always the desire to return back, you know. And this is part of the tragedy of this education, that we are uplifted but yet yearn to go back, you know. And we know, in a certain sense, we can never go back. That once we have this experience and we're sort of untethered, we face the realization that with our freedom comes this realization that our place in relationship to tradition, our place in relationship to our home, becomes one of our, in a certain sense, it's a choice. It's not something that is simply given to us. We have to engage with that past. We have to decide if we're going to re-energize the tradition. Now, pushing back, and in the context that I'm in, one could say, well, that's what you're talking about is part of the discourse of Western philosophy, right? That there is, you know, this disconnection is part of the sort of awakening that we receive in relationship to our own freedom, and even talk of freedom. that this is already sort of saturated with Western philosophy. But then this becomes my question that I'm going to leave my commentary on, which is to say, to what extent, you know, I'm using the word freedom. Freedom wasn't a word used in Greek philosophy. The concept of the free as a positive step really arrives with, I would say, Epictetus, you know, and the Roman philosophers, and this concept of freedom, and then it just, you know, returns with Western Enlightenment. So it does arrive out of the Western philosophical tradition, but then my question becomes, in terms of the word possibility, something that has a more fundamental quality to it, that's not overladen, if you will, with the history of Western political theory or the history of Western philosophy. What terms could we locate in all the various traditions, past, present? What words are alike this word, potentiality or possibility? And this becomes a project that I want to explore further. That is to say, if the family of terms, it can be extended outward. And as I said earlier in the session, if it's the case that this so-called universal grammar, which seems to me a euphemism for philosophy, is a response that we can trace to each and every civilization, every culture, every tradition, as the response to this fundamental encounter with being's presencing. If we reduce all human traditions and cultures to this fundamental experience, and the response being something like these fundamental terms, words used to account for the perceptions that humans have of the world, the way that we talk about the world. If there are a small set, and my argument is, and my hypothesis is, that there is indeed a small set per tradition. So let's look at these different words. Let's examine these different sayings, sounds even. It may be more fundamental than words. Words may be even more of a secondary, tertiary way of categorizing them, right? So it could be through song, through prayer, through percussive sounds, clapping, drumming, what have you. Right? But what are the ways in which different cultures and traditions over time and across the globe, our common place that we inhabit, responded to that? And I think that in the end, what I'm trying to suggest is that it really goes back to this fundamental encounter with being's presencing, yes, and that we can, what's an interesting project is to look comparatively at these different articulations. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to give one more sort of spatial orientation of where I am in this beautiful, iconic auditorium built in 1927 here at the campus of the University of Pennsylvania.